Hi, welcome back to the shed for episode 11 of the Stratocaster build, where we're going to spend a little bit of time sorting out the headstock. Okay, so last time we got the fretboard remade and stuck onto the neck, trimmed down, and that is all kind of very much where we need it to be. However, there are still quite a number of jobs to do on this neck, and the first set that I want to approach in this episode is to get the headstock a little bit nearer. As you can see, it's still full thickness, so that's 18 mil. It wants to be about 14, so we've got 4 mil to trim off there, and we've also got to get this transition rounded in from the top of the fretboard. That's all stuff that I've kind of covered at least once or twice on this channel, but we'll go right the way through it again, just for those that might not have seen the earlier videos. But before I can do that, there is one thing I want to do first, and that is to set this up and drill in the holes for the tuners. And there's a couple of holes that we need to drill to do this. Firstly, there's the hole that goes right the way through the headstock, which in this instance, that's given me 6.3 mil. So if I go at 6.5 mil, that will leave me a little bit of scope for adjustment. And then once we've actually thicknessed the headstock properly, we need to drill a slightly larger hole for these bushings, which come in at, that's giving me 9.25 mil. I would suggest a 9 mil hole with a little bit of run out from my drill press will get us somewhere in the ballpark for a nice tight fit. Unfortunately, the holes in the template are not the size that we need. They're a little bit bigger. However, what I can do is find a suitable sized transfer punch. Look at that, first time. Honest, that wasn't a setup. I can fasten this template in position where I need it. Same old, super glue and masking tape. I can then punch my center points in there. And then once they're punched in, we'll just get this over to the drill press. In the first instance, I'll just drill all the way through with the 6.5 mil drill bit, which will leave us a nice clean exit once we clean off the front of the headstock. And then once all that's done, we can open them out to accept the bushings. So first off, we'll just get this template stuck in place. Something just to lift that off. And we'll just pop those center points in. Now, up until a week ago, if I'd wanted to have drilled these out with my FAMAG drill bits, I would have been going at either 6 or 7, because I only had this set that goes at 1 mil increments. However, I went to make a central a few weeks ago, and the set I couldn't afford last time, they actually had for much less money. So I now have the full set, goes in 0.5 mil increments. So very, very happy with that. And what I'm going to do before I go anywhere near the actual headstock is I'm just going to drill a hole in here and just check that the shaft of this tuner will go through it. And it's a nice fit, it's not too tight. but not too loose either, which is good. So with that done, we'll get the template off. Get this over to the drill press and get those holes drilled out. Okay, and that's the tuners in their holes, and they actually line up beautifully, so very happy with that. So next up is we can get those all back out again. Just get them back into that box for safekeeping. So that we can set about thinning this headstock down. And I'm going to thin this down to 14 millimeters, and I've got this little template here that comes with a set, and it kind of gives you a rough idea of where the start and end of that transition curve is, and kind of starts about there and ends roughly there. So as long as I don't cut past that line when I'm thinning it down, we should be good to go. And to do this, I'm just going to use the technique I used on the last one, the base 6, which is to take the big router base that I attached to my small trim router, and I'm going to fasten a couple of blocks of wood on, just with some super glue and masking tape, so that that forms a sled that's going to ride over the headstock. I can set the router bit to kind of take that thickness off in a couple of passes, and I found last time that it just gives me a really nice, consistent, even kind of finish to that headstock face, which didn't really need an awful lot of finishing off once I'd done it. And then from there we'll get this onto the bobbin sander just to sand that radius in and make everything lovely. So I'll set this all up off camera and join you back in a couple of seconds. Okay, so that's the bulk of that taken down, and if we get a caliper on that, that is kind of exactly where we want it. That is pretty much exactly on 14 millimeters, so that's brilliant. That's gone really well. So the next step is we'll get this off the board, get a bit of cleaning up done, make a bit of space, get the bobbin sander out and get this set up on the jig that I made for the last build, and we can get this radius sanded in. radius sanded in. There's a little bit of kind of very fine sanding to do there, but generally I'm really happy with that. So that's gone beautifully, and has got us yet another step closer to having this neck done. There's a couple of little jobs that I want to do now at this stage. I want to get the holes drilled for the bushings. I'm not going to fit the bushings, but I am going to drill the holes. I want to cut the slot for the nut, and I want to try and fit the tuners. So we've still got a little ways to go on this episode, but we are getting there. And the first of those jobs I'm going to do is get this nut slot cut in such a way that we can get this bone blank to fit nice and snugly, and I like them to be nice and tight in there. So the first step in that is I'm just going to ever so gently relieve that edge. Take a little bit of material off. And what that will do is just allow me to really kind of get that blank pushed into that edge nice and tight, and then I can just take my marking knife and kind of just try and reach under there with the tip of the knife, kind of deepen that a little bit. Once you've gone in a little way, the blade will tend to follow the cut. And then I'm going to go back and just cut that chamfer going back the other way as well. That will just give me somewhere to register my saw blade. And I'll set that at about 2 millimeters. Which is slightly more than the depth that I cut for the fret slot, so I've gone down with both of them just to make sure that that's where it needs to be. And with this amount of wood, it should be fairly straightforward, just to kind of lever that out. This Wenge is very brittle, so it snaps out quite easily. And to finish that off, I'm just going to clean it up. With a fine file. And we're a little bit shy of where we need to be, so just made sure I'm cleaning that bottom corner up without really filing on the face on the fretboard side of this. That's a lot closer, but it's still not quite there. So I'm going to start working this back only on this face, because obviously we don't want to bring this any nearer the bridge. Okay, so that's in, and it is in nice and tight. And you can push that right into the bottom and it goes down very nicely. So next up, we're going to put the holes in the front of the headstock for the ferrules. Fairly straightforward, 9mm drill bit, just drill in deep enough so we'll be able to seat those ferrules when the time comes. You do need to be careful with this though, because what can happen if you're not careful is the drill can bite into the wood and lift the headstock up, and what tends to happen in that situation is you end up with a 9mm hole right the way through the headstock. Don't ask me how I know that, but it's something we don't want, so we'll just have to be very careful and probably employ the use of a clamp once we've positioned the drill bit, just to hold the headstock down so we don't have any accidents. So we'll head back to the drill press and get them sorted out. Okay, and that's gone quite nicely. So the one job we've got left to do now is to just get this turned over, and then we can get these tuners screwed into position just as a trial fit. And to fit these, we're simply going to drop them in position. And then simply going to line them up with this rule. Clamp that in position so it's not going to move. Drill the holes, bosh the screws in. Now, as you can see, these are genuine Fender parts and the screws actually look quite nice. They look a little bit more robust than you might sometimes get for these purposes. But I'm not going to take any chances. I'm still going to bash a bit of wax into each of them. And there are a few things to remember when doing this. Firstly, wax your screws, because you never do know. Secondly is put a tape flag onto your drill bit so you're not going to drill too far, because the last thing you want is to drill all the way through your headstock. And thirdly is make sure that you've got the right size screwdriver bit for these, because if you haven't, you're going to start chewing those screw heads up and that just looks horrible. And we don't want that. And I'm not tightening them right down at the moment, I'm just going to snug them in. And we can just torque them down properly once we've got them all in place. Again, that just helps to keep everything nicely aligned. And there we are. So that's the headstock thinned down and transitioned, nut slots cut in, and the tuners all drilled through and trial fitted. So that's all gone really, really well. I'm dead happy with that. Looks good. I was a little bit confused with screwing these in though, because there seemed to be way too many screws at first. And I couldn't really understand why, because I've got all of these left over. It turns out that Fender put two sets of screws into these tuners, one crosshead and one slot head. So if you're kind of replacing these onto a vintage instrument, you've got the correct slot head screws, which is a nice touch. So that's a significant step forward in getting this neck done. There's only really two main jobs to do on this now, and that is to get it fretted and then get the back of the neck carved to shape. However, neither of those two things are going to happen in this episode. I'll leave this one here. I'll be back in a couple of days' time where we start to bang some frets into this. Until then, don't forget to hit that like button if you've enjoyed this, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll look forward to seeing you then. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.